Karen marched over and yelled at my grandma for hanging a few pieces of laundry in the sun, said it was bringing down the neighborhood image, humiliated her over clothes on a line. So we checked the zoning laws and found a loophole. A week later, her house was officially rezoned as commercial property. Now she's dealing with city inspections, business taxes, and no peace. All because she messed with the wrong grandma. I grew up spending summers at grandma's house, and now that I work remotely, I stay with her a few times a year to help out around the house. She lives in a quiet little neighborhood that hasn't changed much since the 1960s. Her lawn is always neat, her rose bushes perfectly trimmed. She doesn't have internet, still uses a landline. And every Monday, like clockwork, she does laundry and hangs it on a line out back, just like she's done for over 50 years. To her, that backyard is sacred. It's where she raised 3 kids, grew vegetables, and spent every spring planting marigolds to keep the rabbits out. That clothesline? That was as much a part of her identity as her blue apron and her lemon bars. So when Karen moved in 3 doors down, bringing with her a brand new white SUV, a Bluetooth earpiece permanently fused to her jaw, and a portfolio of urban beautification projects from her last HOA gig, we didn't pay much attention at first. She seemed polite. She waved from the sidewalk, always with a clipboard in hand and a measuring tape that peeked out of her purse like a dagger. We thought she might be one of those organizers who meant well, but got a little too excited about spring cleaning. But we were wrong. It started with a letter, plain white envelope, tucked inside the screen door one Thursday morning. Addressed not with Ms. Johnson or to the homeowner, but with her full name spelled wrong. That was the first red flag. Inside was a formal notice from the HOA. Your property has been found in violation of Article 6, Section 14, unsightly displays. Below was a photo of the clothesline, complete with my grandma's favorite blue bedsheet flapping in the breeze like it was committing a crime. She read it out loud, slowly, then looked at me and said, "What on earth is an unsightly display?" I took the paper and scanned it. Karen had highlighted parts with a yellow marker. Apparently, drying laundry in view of neighboring properties disrupted the unified visual harmony of the community. Unified visual harmony? My grandma's laundry had more history than Karen had years on Earth. But that wasn't the worst part. What stung the most was how small it made my grandma feel. I saw it in the way she folded the sheet quietly and brought in the basket without saying much. How she skipped her usual cup of tea that afternoon and went straight to scrubbing the kitchen floor like she was trying to make up for something. That's when I knew this wasn't just about laundry. It was about control. Let me tell you about my grandma. She's not weak. She's not helpless. But she's kind. The kind of woman who bakes extra cookies just in case the neighbor's kids walk by. Who still sends handwritten birthday cards. Who brings out a pitcher of lemonade when the garbage truck comes by. Because they're working hard, poor things. But she's not used to conflict. Especially not the kind where someone tries to shame her through legal jargon and photo documentation. Karen had found her opening, a tiny detail to exploit, and she'd used it like a wedge. And while most people might have shrugged it off or laughed, my grandma took it personally. Because hanging laundry wasn't about rebellion. It was about routine, about dignity, about a woman holding onto a piece of her identity in a world that constantly tells older people to step aside and be quiet. And I wasn't about to let some clipboard warrior tear that down. I started digging. I wasn't looking for a fight. Not yet. I just wanted to understand what gave this HOA the right to come into people's backyards and tell them how to dry their socks. Turns out, Karen had only been on the board for 6 months. But in that time, she'd proposed more changes to the HOA charter than the last 2 boards combined. She'd pushed through a neighborhood visual standards initiative that hadn't even been properly voted on. Worse, she was citing regulations borrowed from another HOA in a completely different zip code. She wasn't enforcing policy. She was making it up as she went. And my grandma's laundry line? That was just the beginning. What made it worse was how quickly the other neighbors started watching us differently. I noticed curtains shifting when we went outside. Heard whispered comments when I walked the recycling bin to the curb. Karen had done something that I think even she didn't realize. She'd weaponized embarrassment. She turned tradition into violation. turned pride into shame. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have expected, was that I wasn't just my grandma's grandson. I was also a zoning analyst for the county planning office. And while I never used my job to interfere with neighborhoods, I knew the codes. I knew the loopholes. I knew the process of applying and reapplying land use classifications. And most importantly, I knew exactly how Karen's property had been zoned when she bought it. She had no idea the paper trail she just kicked open. And that's when I decided if she wanted to throw rules at my grandma, she'd better be ready to have the entire zoning map thrown back at her. It didn't stop with the letter. In fact, that was just Karen warming up. The next Saturday, I was trimming the hedge when I heard raised voices from the backyard. Not shouting exactly, but sharp, the kind of voice that carries on purpose. I walked around the side of the house and froze. There was Karen, standing at the edge of the property line, sunglasses on, arms folded like she was inspecting a crime scene. And there was Grandma, clutching her laundry basket, caught mid-motion between the clothesline and the patio, like a schoolgirl being scolded for wearing the wrong uniform. "This isn't personal," Karen said, loud enough for the whole block to hear. "But your display is lowering property values. We have standards here, and it's not the 1950s anymore." Grandma tried to respond, something about tradition and clean living, but Karen cut her off. "You don't get to turn this place into a flea market just because you're old-fashioned," she snapped. "I'll be filing a formal violation this afternoon." Then she turned on her heel and walked off, leaving my grandma standing there, humiliated, pink-faced, trying not to drop the basket. I didn't say anything right away. I just stepped over, picked up the clothespin she dropped, and looked her in the eyes. "You okay?" She nodded once, but the answer was no. That night, it got worse. Karen posted a rant in the HOA Facebook group. It started with, "Attention residents, neighborhood standards are for everyone," and devolved into a passive-aggressive manifesto about eye-level clutter, aesthetic blight, and how we must all be stewards of visual harmony, even when some longtime residents forget that others live here too. She didn't name my grandma. She didn't have to. A photo was attached, zoomed in on our backyard, complete with a flapping pair of socks and my grandma's gardening stool in the background. The comments were a mix of pity and pity disguised as condescension. "It's not a big deal, but still kind of tacky. Can't we all just follow the rules? Maybe she needs help with laundry." My hands clenched into fists under the table. My grandma sat across from me, scrolling the thread with quiet horror, as if someone had posted photos from inside her home. "I don't want to cause trouble," she whispered. "But that's my fence. That's my line." I knew exactly how she felt, because this wasn't just a petty post. It was targeted humiliation, dressed up in civic language. Karen wasn't trying to solve a problem. She was trying to make a point. And that's when I decided it was time to make mine. I started with documentation. I pulled the HOA charter and highlighted every vague passage Karen was twisting. I dug up the original zoning application for her lot, the deed to my grandma's home, and even the community design overlay that dictated visual guidelines, none of which mentioned clotheslines. Then I walked outside and did what Karen never expected me to do. I took out my phone and started filming. Every angle of the backyard, the condition of the lawn, the neat row of flower beds, the basket sitting properly beside the patio, the breeze softly lifting a set of clean towels. Not one thing that could be called blight. No yesore, no broken fence. Just clean, orderly, modest living. I narrated it like a property assessor. Calm, deliberate, factual. Then I printed out screenshots of Karen's Facebook post, attached them to the letter from the HOA, and dropped the whole packet in an envelope labeled Documented Harassment. Ongoing. That was the first copy. I made 6 more. The next morning, Karen strutted by again. This time, she didn't speak to Grandma. She looked right at me. "You're really going to push this?" she asked. "Over some laundry?" I didn't flinch. "Are you really going to bully an 82-year-old woman because your Pinterest board doesn't match her backyard?" Her lips curled. "You don't get to override neighborhood standards just because you're sentimental," she sneered. "Visual pollution affects everyone. And if I have to call code enforcement, I will." I smiled. The kind of smile that says you really don't know who you're talking to, do you? "Please do," I said. "They know me pretty well." That was the first crack in her expression. Just a flicker of hesitation before she pivoted and marched away. That evening, Grandma was folding laundry inside instead of using the line. She said it was just for now, until things blew over. But I could see it was eating at her. She was adjusting her life, her joy, just to avoid the wrath of one bitter woman with a clipboard. And I wasn't going to let that stand. That night, I sent the full documentation to the HOA board and CC'd our local city zoning office, along with a few contacts I'd worked with over the years. Because here's the thing Karen didn't realize. When you claim visual pollution and cite ordinances, you'd better make sure your own house is clean. Because the moment someone checks your property file, they might find out just how miszoned your lot really is. Karen had drawn first blood, but she had no idea I was holding the zoning maps to her future. And while I wouldn't yell, wouldn't threaten, and wouldn't stoop to her level, I would make one thing clear. You don't go after my grandmother and expect silence. You picked a fight with the wrong family. And in this neighborhood, the deed still wins over the clipboard that I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to argue. I just needed to look at the map. See, Karen thought HOA rules were the top of the legal food chain, but there's a whole world of city infrastructure, zoning language, and easement logic that sits miles above her clipboard. And I happen to speak that language fluently, because what Karen never asked, what she never even thought to Google, was what I actually did for a living. Let's just say I've worked closely with city planning boards before, zoning commissions, development review panels, the kind of places where ordinances are written, revised, and, if necessary, used as tools for justice. So while she sent passive-aggressive HOA letters and called my grandma's laundry visual pollution, I started pulling files. I logged into the local GIS, Geographic Information System, database, the one that outlines land use codes, neighborhood overlays, and transitional development buffers. It takes about 2 clicks to pull up the zoning for a specific address. And sure enough, there it was. Karen's property. Zoning classification are -2B-T. I smiled. That little T at the end, it stands for transitional, which meant her house, and a handful of others in her strip, sat in a buffer zone between residential and commercial use. It also meant it could be legally rezoned with enough signatures, a development plan, and a valid purpose. So I started assembling my toolkit. No shouting, no diveni fantasies, just paperwork, data, logic, and one very sharp pen. I cross-referenced zoning guidelines, pulled the land use codebook. I even found a section of the city's comprehensive plan that suggested adaptive reuse of properties near corner lots for community-oriented commercial development. Think small bakeries, studios, or consulting offices. Karen's house, right on the corner. A legal sitting duck. All I had to do was make it official. So I filed a rezoning intent notice. It's a quiet little document, one the city rarely sees unless a developer wants to tear something down. It doesn't require Karen's approval, just proximity, a valid legal reason, and a compelling proposal. Mine was simple, rezone for light commercial/mixed use. Did I want to build anything? Not really, but the zoning proposal didn't need an actual project, just feasibility, and I made sure it was squeaky clean. I also filed a request for hearing with the Planning and Zoning Commission. Attached, a digital file of Karen's online rants, including the laundry photo, the HOA violation letter she sent my grandmother, a map showing her location within the transitional buffer zone, my written justification for rezoning, proposed home-based business district in line with city revitalization goals. I wasn't lying. Technically, a rezone could benefit everyone. But in practice, it meant Karen's cozy suburban castle was one vote away from becoming eligible for a therapist's office, a pet grooming facility, a drive-through espresso hut, a mail forwarding company, or just the endless parade of paperwork that comes with being zoned commercial, annual inspections, tax classification shifts, possible signage allowances, and more. I submitted the file, got the timestamp, and waited. 3 weeks later, I received a notice in the mail. Zoning Commission hearing. Petition #2035Z. Karen had no idea it was coming, because, legally, she wouldn't find out until she got her official notice in the mail. A bright, city-stamped envelope that said, "Notice of proposed zoning change affecting your property. Delivered by certified mail." The day that envelope landed on Karen's doorstep was the quietest morning we'd had in weeks. No walk-bys, no clipped stairs, no visual harmony flyers stuck to our mailbox. In fact, she didn't leave the house for 2 days. But I did. I walked the neighborhood, talked to a few other long-timers who were also tired of Karen's reign. I didn't tell them everything, just that a certain zoning proposal had been filed and that they'd be invited to speak if they wanted to. A few smiled. One said about time. Then came the hearing. The Planning and Zoning Commission meets twice a month. It's held at the City Civic Center. Long hallways, folding chairs, dry water dispensers, the works. I wore a blue button-down, brought 2 copies of the packet, and sat near the back. Karen arrived 10 minutes late, flustered with a red folder and a visible twitch in her cheek. She saw me, paused, then realized I was the one who filed it. I nodded. The hearing was quick. They read the proposal, logged it into the record. Then came public comment. Karen practically sprinted to the mic. "This is harassment," she began. "This is an abuse of municipal process. I'm a resident. My home is not for sale. This is outrageous." The board stayed silent. They let her talk, then calmly reminded her. "This is a transitional zone. No one's forcing you to sell. The rezoning petition meets the legal threshold for review." She tried to bluster, threw around terms like emotional distress and grandma's laundry conspiracy. I didn't say a word, just watched the room slowly realize. She was unraveling. Then came my turn. I walked up to the mic and calmly laid out my case. Cited the transitional zoning code, referenced community revitalization goals, noted proximity to key corners and access points, and finally, pointed to Karen's own behavior in HOA documents as proof that her role in local governance had already overstepped boundaries. I ended with a line I had rehearsed in the mirror 3 times. Sometimes, when people misuse the rules, the best way to stop them is to change the game board entirely. I sat down, and the board took it under advisement. No decision that night, but the message was clear. A week later, I got the letter. Rezoning petition advanced to final vote. Karen got hers too. The HOA board held a meeting that weekend. She didn't show up. The rumor was that she was talking to a lawyer. But the truth? She was out of moves. Because the zoning file, the one I built, was airtight. Even if it never passed, the threat alone meant real estate agents would see her home as commercially contaminated. Buyers would pause. Property value? Potentially impacted. And the HOA? Now forced to take a hard look at how their board president got them dragged into a zoning hearing with the city. Karen's silence was the sweetest sound our street had ever heard. The city planner's envelope arrived like clockwork, stamped, dated, and addressed in bold black font. Notice of final zoning hearing. Petition hashtag 2035Z. Affected party. Karen, redacted. Inside, the language was neutral, just facts. But the weight of that letter hit her like a freight train. By the time the notice made it to Karen's hands, the rumors were already swirling. A few neighbors had received notices as well, anyone within the buffer zone. Some were just curious. Others, especially those who had also tasted Karen's HOA overreach, were quietly excited. By the next morning, it was the talk of the neighborhood Facebook group. Wait, what's this about Karen's house going commercial? She said she was the victim of a zoning scam? My grandma got yelled at for hanging tomatoes. This karma's overdue. Karen tried to control the narrative. Naturally, she posted a panicked status. If anyone received a rezoning notice, please disregard. This is a targeted attack. I'm being harassed and victimized by someone abusing city loopholes. My property is not for sale. But the city's wheels were already in motion. The final hearing was scheduled for a Thursday evening at 6:30 p.m. in the downtown municipal building. Gray walls, old HVAC hum, rows of chairs set up in front of a planning board that had long ago lost patience for neighborhood drama. Karen arrived 10 minutes early. She didn't wear her usual HOA blazer or clipboard lanyard. She wore beige, her version of humble, clutched a binder full of highlighted notes, and scanned the room nervously. She spotted me near the back, sitting with Grandma and two other residents from our street, people she had lectured about hedges, flags, or planter colors. She didn't wave. She just sat and waited, eyes darting like a cornered chess queen. When the meeting began, the chair read the docket. Petition hashtag 2035Z, submitted by a private citizen, proposing the reclassification of properties in zone R-2B-T to C. 1. Light commercial usage. Karen's address was listed. The maps were displayed on a projector. All the steps have been followed. Transitional zoning? Heavy checkmark. Legal justification? Heavy checkmark. Notification requirements met? Heavy checkmark. Conflict of interest? None. Then came public comment. Karen rushed to the podium, the first speaker. Her voice cracked as she began. This is an attack, a personal vendetta. I've lived in this community for 4 years, and have only tried to preserve our values. I've served on the HOA board, organized cleanups, enforced guidelines, and now someone is trying to destroy my home's value out of spite. She started tearing up. Her hand shook. Then she looked at Grandma. I didn't mean to upset anyone, but there are rules. People can't just hang underwear on a line and call it quaint. A quiet gasp from someone behind her. She turned back to the commission. Please, I'm begging you, don't let this happen. I'm the victim here. The chair let the silence sit, then nodded. Thank you. Next speaker. I stood up. No blisa. No ange. Just facts. I walked to the podium, cleared my throat, and spoke plainly. Everything I filed complies with your zoning code. I don't wish Karen ill, but it's clear that she used her power, both socially and through the HOA, to target residents for simply existing. My grandmother was shamed publicly for doing laundry. That's not community leadership. That's harassment under the mask of order. I pointed to the city's revitalization goals. This rezoning aligns with your transitional buffer goals. But more than that, it serves as a message that abusing HOA rules to publicly humiliate the elderly isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. And when systems are misused, good citizens must use better systems to restore balance. A few people clapped. The chair raised his hand to quiet the room, but he was smiling. The board recessed for deliberation. 15 minutes passed. Karen paced the hallway, red-eyed and muttering about misogyny and revenge. Her voice echoed faintly. When the board returned, the room tensed. The chair cleared his throat. After reviewing all submissions and public comments, we find the rezoning petition to be compliant with municipal code and within the transitional scope. The reclassification request is approved by a 4-1 vote. Gavel down. Karen's face collapsed like a house of cards in a thunderstorm. She let out a noise that wasn't quite a cry, more like a squeak of disbelief. She stood stunned, then turned, stormed out of the room, binders swinging wildly. The neighborhood heard about the vote within hours. Someone posted the city livestream link to the HOA page. Karen's speech was clipped and shared on Nextdoor. By morning, HOA inboxes were flooded with questions. Did we approve this behavior? Why was she threatening old women over laundry? Is our HOA even legal? Karen tried to spin it one last time. This rezoning was orchestrated by someone with a vendetta. They filed malicious documents and ambushed me in public, but no one was buying it anymore. A week later, she resigned from the HOA board. The letter was cold and short. Due to recent events and a lack of community support, I will no longer serve in my current position. No epali, no acknowledgement. Just exit. And just like that, her reign ended. As for Grandma, she strung up her laundry with pride the very next morning. A neighbor even dropped off a fresh box of wooden pins and said, "For whatever you hang next." Someone else offered to paint a mural on her fence. Laundry is love. Let it fly. And me? I walked the block that weekend with Grandma, both of us sipping lemonade. People smiled and waved. And Karen's house? Still standing. Still on the corner. But now zoned for light commercial. Eligible for a coffee hut, dental office, or tax kiosk. I heard a rumor someone sent her a brochure titled, "Thinking of selling? Transitional zoning got you covered." The days that followed the hearing weren't loud. They were quiet, but different. The kind of quiet you hear after a storm has passed, when everything is still damp with the memory of what just happened, but the air feels fresher. Grandma didn't say much the next morning. She just opened a back door, clipped up her laundry like she had every other Tuesday, and let the cotton sheets flap proudly in the breeze. No flinching, no second-guessing. This time, she didn't check over her shoulder. She didn't need to, because Karen's shadow, the long, judging one that had stretched across this block since she moved in, had finally retreated, and something surprising started to take its place. Neighbors came by, at first quietly. A woman 2 doors down dropped off a tin of cookies and said, "For your courage and for the smell of fresh linen." A father and his daughter walked by later that afternoon and smiled at Grandma's clothesline like it was a monument. And maybe in a way it was, not to rebellion, not even to revenge, but to resilience, to choosing peace without surrendering dignity. Meanwhile, Karen's house remained exactly where it was, now commercially zoned. She wasn't forced to move. That wasn't the point. But the psychological shift had already taken root. Her iron grip over HOA interpretation crumbled the moment people realized she'd overplayed her hand. Some of the very board members who once nodded along to her community standards were now tiptoeing past her property, suddenly unfamiliar with their former queen. One of them, a gray-haired man named Jeff, even knocked on Grandma's door the following weekend. "I owe you an apology," he said, looking down at his shoes. "I knew it was ridiculous. I just didn't want to rock the boat." Grandma smiled kindly and said, "Boats that don't rock never move." He laughed, and I swear it felt like something old and bitter finally lifted. Within a month, the HOA quietly adjusted its language about aesthetic violations. A new clause was added. Historic and culturally traditional practices shall not be penalized or prohibited on the basis of appearance alone. Nobody said it outright, but everyone knew what that meant. Laundry lines, tomato vines, wind chimes, the small things that carry generations, no longer up for debate. And something else changed, too. For the first time since Karen took over, neighbors started helping neighbors without a clipboard telling them to. Someone started a community garden on the corner lot. Another neighbor offered to repaint Grandma's back fence, not because it was required, but because it felt right. As for Karen, she kept to herself. Her yard, once manicured with militaristic precision, now looked like it had grown tired of trying too hard. The hydrangeas sagged a little lower, the white stones were scattered, and the patio chairs never seemed to be used anymore. Some say she put the house up for sale. Others say she's waiting it out, hoping things quiet down. But it didn't matter. The power she held had dissolved, not because she lost an argument, but because the community saw who she really was when she thought she could belittle a grandmother into silence. On Grandma's birthday that summer, I surprised her with a new wooden bench under her clothesline. Etched in the slats was a single phrase: "Let it fly." She teared up, wiped her hands on her apron, and sat down with a cup of tea like she had earned that exact moment in time. And I realized she had. So had we. This wasn't about zoning codes or hanging clothes. It was about dignity and what happens when you protect it instead of apologizing for it. Because the day Karen tried to shame Grandma into hiding was the day this block remembered its backbone. And by the end of it, nobody looked at that clothesline and saw a violation. They saw victory, soft, sun-dried, and absolutely unapologetic. Sometimes, all it takes to expose a bully is a breeze and a few clothespins. Karen thought she could control our neighborhood with citations and HOA rulebooks. She thought intimidating my grandma over a clothesline would go unnoticed, that nobody would stand up, that tradition could be silenced with a clipboard. But she forgot one thing. You don't mess with the generation that raised us. My grandma didn't fight back with fists or fury. She just did what she always did, hung her laundry with grace and pride. And when Karen turned that into a public spectacle, we responded the best way we knew how, with facts, with laws, and with every zoning file her arrogance had overlooked. The result? Her house, once the loudest on the block, was rezoned for commercial use, legally, cleanly, and without a single raised voice. So if someone ever tries to shame you, or your family, for living simply and honestly, don't stoop to their level. Rise above with truth. use the very systems they abuse, and turn them into shields instead of swords. Because in a world full of Karens who think appearances matter more than people, sometimes the strongest protest is a freshly washed sheet blowing free in the wind.